Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer, where we're unpacking a really high-stakes reality that affects thousands of homeowners every single year: the hidden mechanics of home water damage. You know, it's one of those topics that sounds completely mundane right up until the exact moment it happens to you, and suddenly, it's literally the most urgent crisis in the world. To really ground this abstract concept in reality, we're going to use Henrico County, Virginia as our primary case study today. By looking at how water behaves in this specific region's unique geography and architecture, we can understand the universal laws of how water invades, how it destroys, and ultimately, how it can be stopped.
So, you might be wondering, what actually happens in the first 48 hours of a home flood? Well, today we are exploring this critical, ticking clock between a perfectly manageable leak and a catastrophic home disaster. The difference between a minor headache and a massive reconstruction project usually comes down to what happens within this tight 2-day window. Water doesn't just sit there, right? It's actively working against your property from the very second it escapes its boundaries.
Because water damage is such a chaotic event, having a roadmap really helps. So here's our agenda for this explainer. First, the Henrico water problem. Second, the ticking mold clock. Third, the professional restoration process. And finally, costs, insurance, and reality.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the Henrico water problem, local risks.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how rapidly these localized vulnerabilities stack up. In Henrico, a humid subtropical climate brings these really intense summer storms that easily overwhelm outdated stormwater systems. Underneath the homes, you've got clay soil that simply doesn't drain well, and it aggressively pushes groundwater right up against foundations and into crawlspaces. Add in the high water tables near the James River tributaries, and the ground is basically already saturated. But the threat isn't just outside. Look at the architecture. We're talking aging 1960s and 70s split-level homes with cast iron and galvanized plumbing that's basically reaching the end of its lifespan. In the winter, freeze-thaw cycles, burst pipes, and unheated crawl spaces and attics. And then in the brutal summer, heavy HVAC usage leads to overflowing condensate lines in attics, which can literally cause ceilings to collapse. Water effortlessly finds every single weakness in a building envelope. It always takes the exact path of least resistance.
Moving right along to Section 2, the ticking mold clock, water damage timeline.
Okay, before we look at the actual timeline, we need to define exactly what kind of water we're dealing with. The Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, or IICRC, classifies water damage into 3 distinct categories. Category 1 is clean water. Think of a burst freshwater supply line. Category 2 is gray water, which carries some contamination, kind of like a dishwasher overflow. And then there's Category 3, which is black water, and this is the truly nasty stuff. We're talking grossly contaminated, hazardous material like a sewage backup or outside floodwater that has contacted soil and bacteria. It is a full-on biohazard event. Professionals and insurance carriers treat a Category 1 burst pipe very, very differently from a Category 3 disaster. The category dictates the safety protocols, what materials can actually be saved, and what absolutely must be torn out and thrown away completely. And here is the brutal reality of that timeline. This is absolutely not a situation where you can just wait for the weekend to handle it. Within the first 0 to 90 minutes, emergency extraction has to begin to stop the water from spreading deeply into the subflooring and structural framing. If you leave the water sitting past 24 hours, then microscopic mold colonies begin to establish themselves in that humid environment. And if extraction isn't rapid and thorough, then structural rot begins, and you're looking at a mandatory 3 to 5 days of intensive structural drawing.
All right, Section 3, the professional restoration process, Pro Solutions. Let's look at how the experts handle this.
So it happens in 3 highly regulated steps. Step 1 is emergency water removal. And guys, this isn't a simple shop vac operation. We are talking massive truck-mounted extraction units pulling hundreds of gallons per hour out of carpets and padding before saturation completely ruins the framing. But here's the secret. Removing the standing water is only step 1. Step 2, structural drying and monitoring, is where the real work happens. Technicians place commercial dehumidifiers and air movers based on exact psychrometric principles to draw moisture right out of the framing, insulation, and drywall. It's an exact science, and it's monitored daily. Finally, step 3 is the final inspection, verifying that the moisture content of those materials has officially returned to a normal, safe baseline.
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive gap between DIY and professional standards. When homeowners panic during a flood, they usually grab a giant pile of bath towels, a wet vacuum, open a few windows, and kind of just hope for the best. But the professional approach relies entirely on science. I mean, they use thermal imaging cameras to literally see hidden water inside wall cavities without even tearing down the drywall. They use pin-type moisture meters to measure the exact water content in wood and concrete. They deploy commercial dehumidifiers and antimicrobial treatments. This proves exactly why the panic DIY approach so often fails. You simply cannot dry what you cannot see. Now, here is an absolutely crucial takeaway. If you rush that 3 to 5 day structural drying phase we just talked about, or if you pull the commercial drying equipment out before the building materials reach their normal moisture content, you guarantee a secondary disaster. Within 48 to 72 hours, toxic mold will bloom inside your walls. Speed on the front end is vital, sure, but patience during the structural drying phase is absolutely mandatory to protect your home.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 4, Costs, Insurance, and Reality. Economic realities. So the crucial point here is the financial impact, $3,000 to $12,000. That is the average water damage claim range in Virginia. It's a pretty wide range, right? But that's because the events vary so drastically. A minor bathroom sink overflow, that might set you back $2,500. But a whole house pipe failure or a winter freeze where hundreds of gallons pour through your ceiling into your living room, that can easily soar past $15,000. And if you have a beautifully finished basement where a sump pump completely fails, yeah, you're looking at top-tier replacement costs.
Now, when it comes to who actually pays for all this, there's a stark difference in coverage. Sudden pipe bursts or appliance malfunctions, like if a washing machine hose suddenly snaps, usually covered. But look at gradual leaks from neglect. If a slow drip under your sink rots out your floor over 6 months because of deferred maintenance, insurance will likely deny that claim. And crucially, outside floodwaters, say a local creek overflows and comes under your door, that requires a completely separate flood policy. Standard homeowners insurance just won't touch it. This is exactly why professional documentation, photos, moisture readings, equipment logs is the absolute key to proving your damage was sudden and getting your legitimate claims paid.
Which brings us to our final provocative question for this explainer. When the clock starts ticking on water damage, will you be ready? We've seen how regional factors like clay soil and aging pipes kind of set the trap, how mold can take root in just 48 hours, and how thermal imaging and proper documentation are really the only ways to truly fix the problem and get insurance to cover it. The next time you see a small leak, I really hope you remember this explainer. Speed and professional expertise are your only true defenses against the ticking clock of water damage. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this vital topic, and hey, stay dry out there.